Good evening. I would like to call. Is it not? Oh, I'm sorry. Try this again. I would like to call to order the Tuesday, January 14th, 2025 HRA board meeting. First item is approval of the agenda. Are there any edits or changes? If none, may I have the motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Motion made by Mua,
Second.
second by Doblinger. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 6-0. Right. Next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. So we have the approval of the December 10th City Council Port Authority HRA concurrent meeting minutes. Are there any edits or changes? If there are none, may I have a motion to approve the December 10th City Council Port HRA concurrent board meeting minutes?
So moved.
So motion made by Issei, second by Mua. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Motion passes 6-0. The next item is the approval of the December 17th HRA and planning concurrent meeting minutes. Are there any edits or changes? Okay. If not, can I have a motion to approve the December 17th HRA and planning meeting minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay. Motion made by Wooten and second by Doblinger. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0. We're cruising right along. Okay. Next item is organizational business, which I believe there was none. So we will move on to the next item of new business. So the first item is proposed changes to the rental homes for future homebuyers program. May I have the staff report?
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. Anna Salvador, Assistant HRA Administrator. You guys can hear me, right? Okay. The item before you this evening are proposed changes to the Rental Homes for Future Homebuyers program. The purpose of the Rental Homes for Future Homebuyers program is to offer affordable rents to support a pathway to homeownership for income qualifying households. The program includes annual coaching and education on homeownership goals and generally runs for about 5 years for each household. The goals of the amendments before you tonight are first and foremost to make sure that we can continue to provide safe and quality housing. As you know, in 2024, there was significant capital improvements that were completed. And as part of that work, we identified that rents needed to increase to guarantee that we could continue to maintain safe and quality housing. And so that is kind of the impetus for the amendments before you tonight. One thing that staff was continued to balance with this work is to make sure that any rent increases and any amendments to the program would continue to support the underlying programmatic goals of homeownership readiness and affordability. And one way we were thinking through this is how do we make sure that income limits and rent limits are set in ways that would allow for a household to continue to pay into that escrow account, which is where they get that down payment money from through the 5-year program. Additionally, these amendments kind of enhance or outline a clear process for setting new rents. So they're enhancing existing program requirements and how we set rents for the program. So where does this program sit along the housing continuum? The HRA participates in or provides programming across this full housing continuum, and the Rental Homes for Future Homebuyers program is just one of many programs targeted towards low-income households. The special component of this program in particular is its focus on homeownership readiness for this population. And so while it is affordable rental housing, its underlying goal is to move those households into affordable homeownership opportunities as they exit the program. So some background about the current program as it's run. We have 21 active rental properties within the program. And to date, we have 60 success stories of households exiting the program and purchasing homes. We do actually have one household currently going through the closing process, so that number will go up by one this year, which is exciting to hear. The current eligibility criteria for the program is 50 to 80% of area median income. And we do annually recertify households, so we do a recalculation of their adjusted income to identify what that escrow contribution would be on an annual basis. And at that time, we also complete a lease renewal as part of that recertification process. So the proposed amendments before you this evening are twofold. The first component of this is increasing program eligibility from 50 to the 60% AMI limit, and so that top ceiling of 80% is maintained through these proposed amendments. And the goal there, again, for new households moving into the program starting in 2025, it creates that gap between the rents that we're asking and the income levels to allow them higher chances of paying into escrow sooner within the program. The second component of the proposed amendments is incorporating the Met Council 50% AMI rent, affordable rent, as an additional threshold for both setting move-in rents, but also determining rent increases for current program participants. And this, again, is to enhance current program guidelines that include the ability to increase rent up to 5%. So current program participants, again, are already at that 50% AMI income level, at least, to qualify for the program. Our current rent amounts, as you can see on the screen, are well below what the Met Council determines is an affordable rent for households at that 50% AMI level. Proposed increases for current tenants still fall well below that 50% AMI rent, which for in this instance, or for 2025, is $1,615. So the proposed increase or how we would utilize the Metropolitan Council 50% AMI rent is that would be what the new move-in rents are for households, and we would also use it to test against whether a 5% increase or setting the rents at the Met Council limit for current households would result in a lower income or lower rent increase. So using 2025 as an example and applying this methodology, effective rents for new move-ins would be set at $1,615. For current program participants, because the current rents are so far below that $1,615, we applied a 5% increase, which is where we got the $1,143 to $1,489 range. So for current residents, this 5% increase is equal to around $55 to $71 additional in rent per month. For most of our households, what this means is a small decrease potentially in what they could be paying into escrow, but as you can see on the screen, majority of our households have a healthy escrow contribution that they're contributing monthly. And so while it may slightly reduce what they're paying into escrow, it wouldn't prohibit them from continuing to save for that down payment. This 5% increase is also consistent with increases in general affordable property management practices within the industry as well. In terms of next steps, we are in the process of completing a full review of the administrative policies for this program, and we plan to come back to the board with those later this year. These are just more immediate action items because we knew we would need to be increasing rents this year. We wanted to make sure that we were, again, meeting program objectives with any rent increases we applied for this year. Upon board approval tonight, the methodology would be applied through our 2025 rent renewal letters, which are sent out to households 60 days in advance of their recertification. And the proposed methodology would then be applied annually to increase rents and also set rents for new move-ins. This concludes my presentation. I'll return it back to the chair for questions and discussion.
Any questions? Okay, Commissioner Wooten?
Go back to the slide before this one, please. So the rent increase here for impact is currently, or at least would be, 5% first off. And then you look at what the current rents are, $55 per month up to $71 per month based on what?
Thank you, Chair and Commissioner. So the 5% increase is applied to their current rent for that we're charging in 2024. And so the current rents are in a range, so we're not charging the same amount for each household. It's based on when they moved in and what that current rent was set when they moved in. So that's where that range is coming from. Some of our households are at the lower end based on when they moved into the units. Some of our households are at a slightly higher rent currently. And so depending on what their current rent is, that 5% results in a different number.
Okay, and taking a look at that, was there any consideration given to possibly being a 3% the first year as you incorporate this versus a 5%?
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. We did look at that. With the operating costs that we're currently trying to cover, we needed to balance that, and because our rents currently are so low, we determined that a 5% rent increase could be absorbed by current program participants based on where they're sitting at income limits.
A couple more questions, unless somebody else has something. Anybody else have any? Okay,
Do you have one more question?
Yeah, I have a couple
Commissioner
more.
Wooten? Okay.
I just didn't want to hog the mic. My question also goes to in relationship to conversations. I assume those no conversations have been taking place at this point in time with tenants, right?
Thank you, Chair Commissioner. So again, because these rent increases haven't been approved, there haven't been formal communications, but we also don't have a recertification within the program until March. So we do have some time before that needed to happen. So.
Is there anyone in the program right now that might be in jeopardy of losing their housing based on not being able to make current rents?
Thank you, Chair Commissioners. At this time, no. Based on currently where households are sitting in the last income determination we did, that was not a concern that we had when we did our analysis.
Okay. Commissioner, you say?
Yeah, so I just had a couple of comments. First off, kind of piggyback on what you mentioned, I would further add that I think it would be a really good idea to actually speak to the tenants and see where they're at, because I understand, there's the paperwork of where their income is at, but, I grew up in low-income housing, and I know that the reality can be very different in the sense that there can be so many unexpected costs, and kind of with poverty comes with, you have to pay more to be poor, if that makes sense. Like your car breaks down randomly. And so looking at it paper-wise, it may not be easy to see that, but I do think it would be a good idea to actually discuss with them, because for many people, the idea of 5% increase may not seem like a lot, but I think when you're in that position, it is a big change, or it can impact you. So I just think that at least preemptively seeing what they think would be a good idea. And so, I understand that this goes towards them being able to have ownership, but for some people, it's like they kind of have to think about the now as opposed to long term. And it's unfortunate, but I think there should at least be some kind of communication with the actual tenants.
Thank you, Commissioner Issei. If I can just respond to that comment, I appreciate that perspective. I think one thing that is encouraging is based on the current annual meetings that we're having with households and the type of goals that they're setting on an annual basis, many things that we discuss at those meetings include, how are we pursuing opportunities to increase your income? How are we making sure that you have healthy savings? And so the financial readiness education that I think comes in tandem with this program is going to help support some of these conversations around that 5% increase this year.
Commissioner Wooten?
The timing on this, can you help us understand the perspective on your timing, the first quarter versus mid-year or maybe the third quarter?
Thank you, Chair Commissioners. The reason for the timing is we will have 5 move-outs within the first half of this year, and so we wanted to be able to start that higher asking rent as soon as possible to, again, realize that within our operating income for the program.
I have a couple questions. Have rents increased at all since households have moved in, like the ones that are getting ready to move out? Have they had an annual increase?
Thank you, Commissioner Mueller. We've applied increases inconsistently over the last 5 years, so it's not necessarily that there's been an increase on an annual basis for current program participants.
Will this, going forward, will increases be an annual thing?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. It is anticipated, just knowing our current financial situation with these properties, that we anticipate that the increases will be applied more consistently on an annual basis.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Lua?
Thank you, Chair. I think after we've reviewed this and you've gone through the presentation, I feel comfortable with it, knowing the obligation that we have to continue to maintain these properties. I think that it all goes hand in hand with supporting people with the pathway to homeownership. So if we can't provide quality housing, I think that negates a lot of the work we're trying to do to get people into homeownership. So I do understand the impact. Like $55 is, a grocery trip to Cub right now. So it's a lot. But also understanding that money isn't just being increased like a private landlord for profit. This is being increased so that we can reinvest into these properties and make sure that the roofs aren't leaking, that the windows aren't drafty, that people have dignified housing to continue this program and move it into the future. So I feel comfortable with the 5% that we have right now, and I'm looking forward to what we're going to do in the future to continue to keep this program going.
Commissioner Wooten?
Well, I concur with that. Part of the challenge I'm having is that some of the improvements that are going to be made, were improvements that we should have been making them over a period of time, and now it appears to me that maybe the burden of those improvements not being made in a timely manner is being borne by the current tenants. And so I'm ambivalent about how I feel about the timing of this.
I have one additional question. So you said 5 are moving out in 25. Do you have a projection like for 26 and on that is there a chance we could just increase these rents for new move-ins only and people who are currently living don't get an increase? Just a thought.
Thank you, Commissioner Mueller. That was one option we did explore, and the way we were looking at it is actually if we set the rents at a slightly higher rate than the 50% AMI. So in that case, because the starting rent would be so much higher, than like capping that for the 5 years that they're in the program essentially and not realizing any income or rent increases during that time. As part of this work, though, we did do an analysis of assuming that their rent or their income didn't increase over that 5 years, setting it at having the starting income be at 60% AMI without an income increase over 5 years. Even with a 5% increase, they were able to pay into escrow for the majority of that 5 years. Most households were able to, so.
Okay, because my comment was not that they never, once they move in, they get the higher rent and then it's never changed. It's the 5%. But if, just kind of speaking to Commissioner Wooten's concern about how this might affect current residents, if we only had the rent increase and subsequent 5% for all the new move-ins. But I think you kind of answered that.
I thought of one other comment and along this lines too, if you don't mind. And now I lost it. Sorry. Sorry, I lost it.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, Commissioner Carter.
Thank you. So I was just thinking about the people who are currently living in the homes, and they're probably in the middle of their 5 years. Do they sign a contract? I mean, is it a year-to-year contract? And I guess I would assume that some of these things have already been laid out and been agreed to, and so what does that look like?
Thank you, Commissioner Carter. So I will reiterate, under our current admin policies for the program, a 5% annual increase is allowed. That's the maximum already under our current program guidelines. The family signs a contract when they first move into the unit about the programmatic components. So setting goals annually around homeownership readiness, paying into that escrow account. And then they do annually sign a lease that, and at that time we reiterate program goals.
Okay. So I also understand the rationale for making these changes. I guess I would be curious after they're implemented, and I think this is probably just kind of an initial conversation. There's more work to be done, but does that impact our success rate? So I think you said we've had 60 families successfully move on to purchase homes, and I guess I'd be curious with these changes if we kind of stay on track with that level of success, or if this negatively impacts. So I was just, did quick math on a 3-person household at 60%, so $62 going into escrow, and at the end of 5 years, it's $3,720. That's not enough for, so then what happens? And I can ask you more questions offline just in terms of kind of what this looks like for different families in different situations, but I guess that would be one consideration too.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Carter. I think I would just add to, at the end of 5 years, not all households are at the point where they could move right into making an offer on a home. They do have up to a year to access that escrow savings account. So some households, what that means at 5 years is that they move into a different rental property and continue their savings journey, or maybe other initiatives to kind of continue that journey to home ownership. So while their 5 years is a hard cutoff, they still have time, even if it's a smaller escrow, to explore other down payment options to supplement whatever they've saved into the escrow account. And our staff does talk through that with them at that time.
Yeah, and commissioners, if I could just mention, so part of the goal of these changes would be to increase our success rate. That's the hope and goal, and part of the way we're doing that is by allowing that gap between the rents and the incomes, and so we'll definitely keep monitoring. We're also looking at the full program for review, so the board can expect that full review in the coming, probably later this year, and that will also include some considerations for other ways that we can make this program successful.
Any other questions, comments? All right, hearing none, may I have a motion to approve Resolution 2025-01, approving amendments to the rental homes for future homebuyers program management and admission policies?
So moved.
Motion by Doblinger.
Second.
And second by Carter. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-1. Okay. All right, next item on the agenda, 5.2, which is the Aeon loan deferral request. May I have the staff report?
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. So this item is a request from Aeon for deferral of their loan with Blooming Meadows South. So to give you some background, this is a map showing where Village Club is. Village Club is the previous name of the complex that now encompasses Blooming Meadows South and Blooming Meadows North. It's a 306-unit apartment that was at risk for conversion from naturally occurring affordable housing to market rate rents with a potential for displacing tenants. And that was back in 2019. And at that time, Aeon approached the city and the HRA to request assistance in acquiring the Village Club complex to preserve that affordability and complete improvements to address life safety issues and attain code compliance for Blooming Meadows South. So some background on where those properties are at now. Since 2019, improvements have been made at Blooming Meadows South to address those life safety concerns and code compliance issues. And we were informed that a total of $3.2 million have been invested to address those issues. There's also been construction of new units on the complex, and that was on one of the underutilized surface parking lots within the property, and so that's now known as Blooming Meadows North. You can see it pictured there. Blooming Meadows North is income averaged at 60% AMI, meaning all the units are affordable at different affordability levels, and affordability was preserved at Blooming Meadows South. And those units are preserved at the 80% AMI level, but we've been informed by Ann that in reality, many of those rents are at 60% AMI or below, so they're even more affordable at this point. So as I mentioned, the city and HRA provided assistance to Aeon for the acquisition and improvements that were made to Blooming Meadows South, and that was for the preservation of those units. There was also, as part of that assistance, there was understanding that a future phase of development would take place within the complex. That first phase was Blooming Meadows North, which has happened. And so to support that acquisition and the improvements made, the HRA loaned Aeon $7 million from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And part of the agreement, which was renegotiated in 2021, is that Aeon would repay $2 million in principal and $1 million in interest by January 2023. And that has taken place. And through that repayment, the next required principal and interest payment was scheduled or is scheduled for tomorrow, January 15th of 2025. Additionally, the HRA established a housing TIF district to support the project. So the housing TIF district captures increases to property value resulting from the improvements to Blooming Meadows South and the construction of the new units, which is Blooming Meadows North. The revenue from the TIF district is split in several ways, which are shown in this graphic. The main takeaway points are that all of the TIF increment generated by Blooming Meadows South, so the preserved affordable units, all of that revenue is retained by the HRA. And then for the TIF revenue from the new units from Blooming Meadows North, that revenue is split between the HRA and Aeon. And the TIF revenue that goes to Aeon is paid through what's known as a pay-go TIF note. And so that's the majority of the revenue from this TIF district, around 70%, goes to Aeon, and the remainder is retained by the HRA. So for the request tonight, Aeon has requested deferral of its biannual 2025 Affordable Housing Trust Fund loan payments. There are multiple factors that have brought this request forward. I've listed those there. Aeon is currently working with its senior lender on Blooming Meadows South to refinance the project and consider funding for comprehensive rehab at the property. And the requested deferral is for those two payments. Each payment is $197,722.83. So the total amount that would be deferred for 2025 is $395,445.66, and those payments would be deferred until the loan's current maturity date, which is January 15th of 2040. The intention of this requested deferral is to allow Aeon time to consider next steps related to Blooming Meadows South and to continue the preservation of affordability at the property. The HRA will be able to continue making its loan repayments by utilizing the annual $500,000 HRA levy. The staff anticipate from Aeon that there may be additional subsidy requests related to future comprehensive rehabilitation of Blooming Meadows South. And staff wanted to include that given the financial situation of Blooming Meadows South and the secondary position of the HRA's loan, there is financial risk that Aeon will not be able to make future payments on the loan. This is the staff recommended approval of the deferral request. You can make this motion, and at this point we can take questions and discussion. And I do want to mention Dr. Johnson is here tonight from Aeon. So, thank you.
All right. Questions? Comments? Commissioner Wooten.
Can you help us understand how in 21 and 23 Aeon was able to make those payments and now they're asking for a deferral?
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. For what I've read from that amendment process, so the initial loan agreement was made for the acquisition and improvements made for Blooming Meadows South, and that was around 2019. In 2021, in 2020 and 21, Blooming Meadows North was being negotiated to begin construction, and at that point, the HRA entered into an amendment process for its Affordable Housing Trust Fund loan, and part of that amendment resulted in a schedule for that repayment of $2 million in principal and $1 million in interest. And the timing of those repayments was to coincide with equity through the tax credit program. So there was a scheduled receipt of equity that basically, my understanding is it wasn't coming in the timing that Aeon had initially expected. And so that renegotiated schedule was to allow for the equity to come in to make those payments. So that was essentially a one-time receipt of funds to Aeon for that project that is no longer available. And through my reading of the docs related to this project, there was always an intent to repay a portion of the $7 million loan. It was never the intent to have that entire loan balance be outstanding for the term of the loan.
And the deferment to the end of the loan, can you help us understand the thinking in that process, as well as is there interest accrued with that deferment, or is just the actual principal they're paying?
Chair and Commissioners, the deferral to the end of the loan is the requested form of deferral from Aeon, and so that's what the recommendation from staff has been. That's the recommendation that staff have brought. The payments, the future payments will they'll be the same biannually every year until the maturity date. So it's that 197 and change. That is the principal and interest payment negotiated in the loan docs. So the deferral would not impact the required debt service for the following years. It will still be that same amount twice a year. Chair and Commissioners, that's right. The two deferred payments would be part of a balloon maturity date of the loan.
Commissioner Mua.
Thank you, Chair. So the anticipation is that they're just requesting 2025 deferral. Payments would resume again in 26. Is that correct?
Chair and Commissioners, that is the request that Aeon has brought at this point, and that's to give them time to negotiate with their senior lender during this year.
I guess additionally, what is Aeon doing to address the issues that are on this screen right here, in case this happens again in 26, and then we're back here again talking about this?
Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. Dr. Eric Anthony Johnson, President, CEO at Aeon. So first of all, we really appreciate the time in terms of the consideration. But let me just give you a little context so you really understand it. It's funny, I was actually here and put this deal together during my time as Community Development Director for the city of Bloomington. So I'm really familiar with how this actually happened. But to those issues, I just got to just give you some context. After the pandemic and the eviction moratorium, we basically was faced across the portfolio. We lost roughly 63% of our revenue across the organization in terms of non-payment of rent, just like no payment of rent. Add to that safety and security issues, increased issues related to time spent in units where you couldn't access the units to do any inspections, any repairs, moving from an average of about, let's say, I don't know, 2,000 to turn a unit up to about 7,500 to turn a unit. So when you see this sort of collection of issues that really took place, it really started happening around the pandemic. But what we can also tell you now is that the development is starting to perform much better. We have moved from significant vacancies. We're probably at about 95% occupied. But the capital improvement needs related to the roofs, interior piping, things of that nature is really the problem. And it's also important to know that the deferment is needed because our lender, National Equity Fund, is going to provide us more time to put together a strategy. And that strategy will consist of the state's community stabilization program, which Aeon led the effort to get that funded. And there's a note on the screen. We may return to ask for some additional support as we put together a totally recapitalized program at Blooming Meadows South. But so it's really, the debt was due to NEF end of the year, given everything that happened, not performing. Okay, we'll give you more time, give an extension to work through what the comprehensive strategy will be, and we will also return to give you an update in terms of what that strategy will be.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
Yep, thank you.
The other question I have for staff is, what's the opportunity cost of us utilizing the $500,000 from the HRA levy? What are basically we going to miss out on by utilizing these funds to support the Blooming Meadows South, which I understand is key to us maintaining affordable housing and naturally occurring naturally affordable housing. But we have a lot of work we want to do, and there's a lot of things we need to get going on. So what's the opportunity cost here for utilizing these funds?
Chair and Commissioners, the $500,000 is part of the annual HRA budget. It's a levy backstop, and it's essentially held currently in escrow. So there isn't necessarily an opportunity to utilize that fund at this time. The intention of that fund is to be available for situations such as this, where there isn't repayment of loans that are due to the HRA, and that is so that the HRA can ensure that it's meeting its obligations, its debt obligations that are external to the city.
Other questions? Comments? I have a question, and I don't know if it was answered or just not to my satisfaction, but again, how do we know that in coming back in 26, you're going to be able to pay? And I think one of the slides says, this is at risk, but and how much of a risk of the whole thing falling apart, or I guess, how do we know? What are our assurances that the situation will turn around in a year?
Chair and Commissioners, it's a challenging situation financially for both parties involved, for sure. And the goal of the request is to get to that assurance, essentially, so that Aeon can develop a strategy that keeps this project in good financial standing. So the HRA, the proposal here is intended to be a good partner with Aeon as they go through that process. And it's also part of the reality is that the HRA's loan is in second position, as most public subsidy is, and that gives us pretty limited leverage in terms of negotiating on these sorts of situations. So we're behind the senior lender in this case. So that's part of the financial situation that creates a challenge for the HRA.
Is there?
Could Dr. Johnson, could you come up and shed some light on this, answer this question?
Commissioner, state that question again.
How do we know that you can pick up payment in 26, and what is the risk of this project falling apart?
You know, that's actually a good question, and the attempt here is to prevent loss of units at Blooming Meadows South. And what we mean by that is the lender, National Equity Fund, is actually giving us the time to really pull together a strategy. Here's the problem in full transparency. Interest rates are not favorable. A property that has serious capital improvement needs, a property that its appraised value has dipped significantly. It's not the only one. We are sort of the forerunners on NOAA properties, and we own a lot of NOAA properties, and those properties have a lot of capital improvement needs. So to really answer your question, it's actually a risk we're taking to see if we can pull together a strategy that will be able to repay the HRA, make sure the lenders are paid as well, while also preserving the units. Now, the beauty of this is I've been in this job 3 years as the new CEO, and we've been fighting this issue across our portfolio. And I think we're doing a good job in terms of turning the corner on some very tough properties. But this one in particular, so you know, I have a personal stake in this one because I was here to get this deal done. And I feel Bloomington is a great partner, and we do not want to do anything to disrupt that relationship. So making payments, you know, we made payments in the past. We're going to make sure we stick to that commitment to try and get it done. But there is a risk should we falter. But what the lender is saying, okay, Dr. Johnson, we're going to give you guys an extension, work on the strategy from the pro formas to the sources, everything, and let's talk about how we can get this done. So my commitment is to keep the HRA totally informed. We'll come back at any point, any time, any requests to keep the HRA up to date in terms of what we're dealing with.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Commissioner Wooten?
Is there, and you don't have to answer this now, but as you look at their strategy about remaining viable, if there's anything you think the staff here can do to assist in partnering with you to help leverage your integrity and the commitments you've made and the ability to keep things afloat for the past 3 years.
Yes.
I'd hope that you would feel comfortable enough to, especially since you have a relationship, to come and ask and not just wait and report what can't be done or what challenges you have.
Absolutely, Commissioner. I really appreciate that. And I can tell you what we're trying to do. We're trying not to come back and ask for a gargantuan subsidy, if that makes sense. So we will do our best to ensure that we get, my direction to staff is, look, Bloomington is a great place to do business, to work, the government, the whole setup over here, I think is first class. And while that may be the case, we still do not want to come in here saying we need $25 million for this project. That's not what we're trying to do. We want to hopefully put together something that makes sense, but we will absolutely do that. So I appreciate that statement. Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Anyone? Okay, well then, hearing none, may I have a motion to approve deferred payments for the Bloomington Meadows South loan between Aeon and the Housing and Redevelopment Authority in and for the city of Bloomington.
Move to
So
approve.
Oh,
All right, motion by Commissioner Wooten and second by Commissioner Isay. All in favor? Oh, excuse me.
Can I make one comment, please? This particular item, I've been thinking about since the packet came out, and I will support this one this year. But if things start falling apart, if next year we have to come back and do this again, it's really hard to justify the continued public support because we have TIF in this, we have the Affordable Housing Trust Fund money in this, we'll be deferring a payment to the end of the term. We're utilizing an additional $500,000 from the HRA levy, which is additional just public funding for this. It makes me very uncomfortable if we have to do this again. And so I do believe the words that Dr. Johnson has and the insight that he's provided to us. And I want to continue to be a partner. And I think the lender being willing to extend for Aeon to continue to do this work gives me confidence. Because if that lender is willing to do this, then I feel confident that there is a path forward. But if we have to come back again this next year, this time, I don't know if my answer will be the same.
Thank you. So I think we're at the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 6-0. Did you want to do your thing after? Okay. So next up is discussion items, and that is the sanitary sewer funding update. May I have the staff report?
Good evening, Chair Mueller, Commissioners. I'm Glenn Markegard, I'm Planning Manager, and I want to give you a little bit of an update on sanitary sewer funding. And you might ask, what does that have to do with the HRA? Why talk about sewers at the HRA? It's because it has a big impact on housing. If we took no action at all, just left the sewer system in its present level, then portions of the city would not be able to continue to develop, which would lower the ability of the city to impact housing needs through new supply, and would also put a lot of price pressure on existing units as well. And then certainly this has an impact on development finances. If you're developing property and you have these new fees, that's going to put more pressure on your pro forma and make it difficult, increase funding gaps. So that's why we're here tonight, to talk a little bit about that. So Bloomington has reached its sewer capacity in several areas of the city. Two areas we're calling the North Central and South Central area are already at capacity, so no additional development could be added, or very little in these areas until we do some sewer improvements. And then other areas of the city in the near term, before 2040, we also expect that they'll reach their capacity as well. So a big impact on future development. Our public works staff has put together many improvements that are needed. These are all in our capital improvements program between now and 2040. You can see the map of all the different areas that new sewer pipes are needed. If you add all these together, right now they total just about $55 million, and that's between now and 2040. So we've been working on this a while. We've had a multi-departmental staff work group focused on this. Had some initial discussion with the council back in May, and then over the summer we did a lot of community outreach, met with key stakeholders, received some initial direction from the council in October, and then on December 2nd, after a public hearing, the Council adopted the Bloomington's first city SAC fees, sewer availability charge. So that's now in place. It took effect at the first of the year. So the city looked at several options, including no action, living with what we have in terms of sewer system, funding improvements through SAC fee, funding it through increased utility rates, or alternative sources, or some combination of those. In terms of community engagement, we had an online survey, not scientific, but what we heard from people that responded was a preference to fund improvements through a city SAC fee or some combination of SAC fee and other sources. At our developer roundtables, the general takeaway was that developers understood that we had concerns and that they understood the need to have a city SAC fee. They encounter that in a lot of other cities. Wasn't in place in Bloomington in the past. That being said, they also preferred that other parties pay for it rather than them paying themselves, whether it's other geographic areas or utility rate payers as well. So the council-directed approach was to move forward with our two most critical sanitary sewer projects, the North Central and the South Central project, and to fund those projects and then others beyond that through a mix of fees on new development, that's the city SAC fee, and increased sanitary sewer user rates. So that's the fees that users citywide pay monthly on their utility bills. And then to continue to pursue alternative funding sources, especially federal and state grants. And this is, I believe, the city's #1 legislative request this year is for assistance on that North Central project. So the adopted SAC fee, it works out to $2,026 per SAC unit. And a SAC unit is the measure of the amount of sewer flow that different uses have. One SAC unit is equal to the flow from one single-family home. City SAC fees are fairly common. A lot of our neighboring communities have them. And the intent is if everything goes to plan, if you measure between today and 2040, that approximately 61% of the costs of all these different sewer projects would come from SAC fees, and then the remainder 39% would come from increased utility rates. That 39% also happens to be the calculated percentage across all of these projects of the asset renewal component of each project. The idea being when you take an old sewer pipe in the ground and you replace it with a new sewer pipe, some of the cost is just having a bigger pipe, but you're also adding benefit to the system at large because now you have a brand new pipe that would not need to be replaced even if you set aside the capacity issue. In terms of the utility rates, this graph shows over time the projected future rates. The blue line is if we did nothing in terms of adding capacity to the system, but rate increases are anticipated just because we have asset renewal needs. We have pipes that are reaching their lifespan. But you add in the capacity expansion, that's potentially the red line. Our hope is that our development will come in at higher levels than we forecast. We forecast for the next 5 years very, very conservatively. But if the development does come in at a stronger pace, then the need for higher utility rates would lower. Rather than the red line, we'd be closer to that blue line in terms of rate increases. Bloomington historically has compared very well to peer communities in terms of utility rates. With these increases, we do anticipate Bloomington would move a little bit closer to the average of these peer communities. But we know that a lot of these communities are facing similar situations, and they'll be raising their rates as well. So addressing these constraints has a lot of positive benefits. Certainly the community can continue to grow and evolve. That means new housing, new businesses, services, things that residents value, increased economic activity, new employment opportunities with that activity, tax-based growth. So a lot would be spent, but a lot would be gained at the same time. Looking at SAC fees in other communities, they range quite a bit. On the low end, Maplewood, $130 per SAC unit. On the high end of what we surveyed, Brooklyn Center at $5,000 a SAC unit. The SAC amount is based on the community's need specifically, so you can't really compare one city to another, but Bloomington would be in kind of the middle range in terms of what the fees would be among the cities that charge city SAC fees. We did some case studies looking at what would be the impact on different types of land uses. So if we look at a single family example, assuming a project cost of $500,000, single family home generates one SAC unit, so their fee $2,026. That would be 0.41% of the project cost would be the fee. If we look at some other land uses here, Noble Apartments, 149 SAC units, there the fee would be 0.7% of project cost. On a mixed use example, 0.68%. On an industrial example, 0.41%. And then a hotel would have been 0.35%. So generally that fee is ranging somewhere between 1/3 of 1% and 2/3 of 1% of construction cost. That sounds like a low number, but that can be the difference between a project moving forward or not moving forward. And we certainly recognize that that's significant in the context of development. So what are the impacts on development? Well, there are really two scenarios that could happen. One is if the pro forma allows, if the pro forma has enough space to absorb the fee, that could be one scenario. And then essentially the developer is paying the fee out of their what would otherwise be additional profit. The other scenario is if you have a pro forma that does not have extra capacity, then that creates a gap in the pro forma. And in that case, the developer has a few options. They could try to pass along that additional cost through higher rents or higher sale prices, but that's very tricky because the market probably won't support that. They're probably getting whatever rents they could get out of the market anyway. Another option would be to pursue the project in a different city that did not have the fee. A lot of our surrounding cities do have these fees. Or they could seek public resources to fill the gap, such as TIF. And we think that will be a very common request. We'll see a lot more requests in the future, not only due to this fee, but other fees that have been added in recent years as well. And then finally, another option, they could simply not pursue the project, which would be a worst case scenario. In terms of next steps, the City Council did ask that we return by the end of the first quarter of the year to talk about a couple things. First of all, potential exemptions for affordability, sustainability, or other factors. And then secondly, potential use of the South Loop Development Fund to pay at least for projects in the South Loop District. And then we have the construction of our first 2 projects, both of which are in the study phase, feasibility phase right now. The South Central project hopefully would be complete by November of this year, and then the North Central project by November of 2027. And you can see the prices there: $4 million for the South Central, $26 million for that North Central project. So that's all I have for you tonight, but happy to take questions or hear your comments.
Questions, comments? Okay. I know.
Yeah, a couple of weeks. Yep. Well,
All right,
thank you.
Thank you. And now Administrator Abe had some updates, comments.
Yeah, if I could just say, actually, Glenn, before you walk out, just wanted to say Glenn is retiring in a few weeks, as was just noted, and so this will probably be the last time you see him before the HRA, unless we force him to come here on January 28th for some unspecified reason. But just wanted to recognize the many years he's been here at the city and thank him for the numerous presentations to the HRA and all of that work. So thank you, Glenn.
Yeah, just want to say thank you to the HRA. I've had the privilege over the years on working with the HRA very closely on major redevelopment projects, Francis Old Shakopee, Penn American, 86 and Lindale. And so I've gotten to see the really important work that you do, and I thank you for your service on this commission.
Thank you and good luck to you.
Thank you.
And then I just have a couple of other quick updates. First, our next meeting is on the 28th, and then February 11th is the annual meeting of the HRA. So you may have noticed you don't have calendar holds yet for meetings after February 11th. That's not because the HRA isn't meeting. It's because they get approved on February 11th. So please don't book all your Tuesday nights. We're planning to continue the schedule on the second and fourth Tuesday of the month. And then I wanted to give good news of a couple grants that the HRA has received. One is for Southview Estates, which is a project that preserves, I think it was 37 units of affordable housing and is converting 10 market rate units to affordable. And so that received a grant from the Met Council for $700,000. That does include a portion of HRA match, so you might see that come before you again shortly to just talk about what the match mechanisms for that. And I believe that's come before the board in the past. And then the other one is when we approved the agreements for 9030 and 9030 or 9060 Park, we mentioned that we had applied for some additional funding that might help lower the HRA gap subsidy. And I'm happy to announce that that project also received an additional grant award. So that will provide more updates as that gets going, but that project should start construction shortly this year, and happy to say that the HRA subsidy will be a little bit less than anticipated. And that is all for my updates.
Thank you. So we have come to the end of our agenda. Do we have a motion to adjourn January 14th, 2025 HRA board meeting?
So moved.
Moved by Dobling. Oh my goodness. Moved by Wooten. And second by Issei. All in favor? All right. Opposed? Meeting adjourned.